Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/I Hear of Sherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 277, Sherlock Mondays.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, this isn't Monday. What are you doing?
I'm trying to flip my calendar around so that I can avoid having Friday the 13th on Wednesday.
That's a good plan. You know, if Friday the 13th drops on a Wednesday, is it as unlucky?
I don't know. Whenever that happens, I'm always under my bed for the day. So I can tell you, I wind up cleaning a lot of dust out from under there.
That is great. Yeah. Well, we have a fascinating show for you once again. We're greeted with a guest from the Rosenbach Museum and Library, Ed Pettit. Now, you've heard us talk about Dr. A.S.W. Rosenbach here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Actually, he's one of our recurring jokes, particularly every time we have Bob Katz on. We mention Dr. A.S.W. Rosenbach.
Stephen Rothman.
And Bob's the one who gets upset about it when we ask him about Dr. Rosenbach's specialty.
Well, whether or not he's still accepting patients,
that's the one.
It doesn't have a title yet officially, but the book is about medicine in the Sherlock Holmes stories in the canon.
Anything about Dr. A.S.W. Rosenbach?
He's not a physician. He keeps telling you the guy's degree was in English literature. You know?
Dang.
Oh boy! But our journey with Rosenbach continues. In this case, as we welcome back Ed Pettit, who is hosting a regular weekly program, what does he call it? A Biblioventures each week that Sherlockians must attend or at least check out. And you'll hear more about it and the whole making of it, as well as other activities at the Rosenbach Museum and Library from Ed in just a moment. Before we get to that, we should advise you to check out our website, ihearofsherlock.com. We have occasional text updates there, things in the news. We'll talk about some of the Sherlockian news after the interview. But we also have email updates you can get and a link to our Patreon. Our Patreon supporters get the show ad-free and are also part of a burgeoning community there. There are thank you gifts at various levels of commitment. So why don't you head to patreon.com/ihearofsherlock to check that out. It's all available on the ihearofsherlock.com website. And of course, if you have feedback on the show, please write to us. We are comment@ihearofsherlock.com, or you can find us on all of the socials. We have a simple link for you to find us everywhere we are at linktree/ihearofsherlock. That's linktr.ee/ihearofsherlock. And that's in the show notes as well. Edward G. Pettit is the Sunstein Senior Manager of Public Programs at the Rosenbach and has been presenter for the weekly Biblioventures series, which includes Sundays with Dracula, Sundays with Frankenstein, Sundays with Jane Eyre, Austen Mondays, Pride and Prejudice, and also Pickwick Monthly. And now you're hearing him as one of the co-hosts of Sherlock Mondays. Pettit has taught many reading courses at the Rosenbach on many authors and books, including Sherlock Holmes stories, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the novels of Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe, and Philadelphia Gothic. He's a member of the Philadelphia Baker Street Irregular Science Society, the Sons of the Copper Beeches, serving as the recorder of pedigrees, and has probably never read a Sherlock Holmes story without smoking a pipe while reading. Ed Pettit, welcome back to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much, Scott and Bert. It is a great pleasure to be on this show again.
Yeah, well, for those who haven't listened yet, you were with us, back on episode 119. We did kind of a two-hander in that episode. Did an interview with Lindsay Fay and did an interview with you. So now I guess you've graduated to the point where you get your very own episode.
Many episodes ago, that was. I had just begun at the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and we had a exhibition that featured Sherlock Holmes and other, mystery detectives. And I was on talking about that. That was really great. And that was such a thrill for me. I had just gotten this job. I was in it less than a year, and then here I was on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, which is a podcast that I had already been well invested in at that time.
Well, take us on that journey from when you took the job and what has transpired since then and how things are going at the Rosenbach Museum and Library.
For those who don't know, the Rosenbach is a rare book collection and historic house from Dr. A.S.W. Rosenbach and his brother Philip. Dr. Rosenbach of the brothers was literally the most famous antiquarian book dealer in the first half of the 20th century. A lot of qualifiers there, right? But still, like in the book world, in the rare book world, everybody knew who Dr. Rosenbach was. He helped create many of the great collections around the world, like a lot of the books in the Huntington or the Folger came through Dr. Rosenbach. And he was also a keen collector himself. So our collection, the brothers, when they died in 1954, made the collection and the house and the home a public museum. And the Rosenbach hasn't stopped collecting since. We have this like enormously vast collection we have the very first printing of Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. And not only do we have the very first printing, we have the only copy of the very first printing of Poor Richard's Almanac.
Wow.
We have one of the 11 surviving copies of the Bay Psalm book. We have a complete manuscript of Joyce's Ulysses. We have Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula. What a great Lewis Carroll collection, the best Robert Burns collection this side of the Atlantic. And several Arthur Conan Doyle first editions, as well as the manuscript for The Empty House. And connected along with this, we also have a great Christopher Morley collection, especially because Dr. R collected all of Morley's books and knew him, and we have lots of letters from Morley to Dr. R. So that's the place that I work at. And what I do for them is I'm a senior manager for public programs, and I create programs that feature our collections so we can share this stuff with the world. We also run in-person and online reading courses, mostly based on the works in our collections. But most of my work these days is in running those courses, but also creating online programs. I did all the public programs for the Rosenbach when I first came on board in 2017, and did that for a few years. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to figure out a way, because they were going to pay me, which was really nice. I wasn't laid off, even though we couldn't have in-person programs anymore, and I had to find a way to do new stuff. And I came up with this idea to do these web series where we take these deep dives into books, or in this case with the Sherlock Holmes stories, individual stories, and do a live show where we talk about the works, we give context for the works. It's kind of like I call it a conversational annotation, and I have fun. There's a cocktail every week on the show, which is always good, to keep the conversation going, and that's what I've been doing for the Rosenbach really since 2020 when the pandemic hit and we had to move online, and I've stayed online to do show after show for them.
That's fascinating. Have you learned anything about your audience? Because you've got this split between online and in person, and I know there are obviously physical limitations to how many people can come to in person kinds of events. But what's your sense of your online audience and your reach and the sort of person who's participating in these kinds of things?
Yeah, that was it, because in person, as popular as we were ever going to be, I could never have more than 55, 60 people in a room participating in a program, and we always knew we had to go online and create digital programming, and we're really ready to do that, and then we're forced into it when the pandemic hit. And what happened was the great, silver lining for us is that our audience not only greatly expanded, but the geographic reach of the Rosenbach now. We have people all over the world, not just watching our shows, but as members, and donating money, because the Rosenbach's a nonprofit. We rely on people to donate to us to stay open, to keep the doors open, and to keep the shows running. And people joined up in other countries all over the world and all over the United States. People who very likely will never get to visit us in person are happy to be members and keep this kind of programming going. And that was a shock. The first show I did a show called Sundays with Dracula, in which every week there's 27 chapters in Dracula, and the novel happens to be 27 weeks long. So I said, chapter a week, I'll talk about it. And we have the notes for Dracula at the Rosenbach and lots of interesting things about Dracula and Bram Stoker. And I'm thinking, well, if 10 people show up, that'd be great. And over 100 showed up to watch the first show. And then it just grew from there. And every one we've done, we did Dracula and then Frankenstein. And then we did Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And then we did Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And now we're doing the Sherlock stories. And every audience has grown for each show. We have more people for each show. And that is, it's great luck on one hand, but also we have discovered that people want to find communities of people who are interested in their. I mean, this everybody knows this. People want to find communities that have their same interests, but that also goes for literature and great books, and this is what we tap into.
How do you go about designing the program? I mean, once you pick, because it's such a wide variety. You've got Jane Eyre and Dracula and Frankenstein, and of course Dracula and Frankenstein. You can presume there are these audiences, as there are with Sherlock Holmes. But your fundamental challenge is you're talking about books and literature. How do you think through the dynamics of the program to make that real to people?
The books that we concentrate on have to be central to our collection. So we have, copies of all those books mentioned in our. We have a first edition of Frankenstein. We now have a first edition of Jane Eyre. But we have Charlotte Bronte wrote a preface for the second edition, and we have the manuscript for her preface for that. With Austen, we just have first editions of all of her works and many other books like kind of related to that in her same time period, books she loved. And for Sherlock, obviously, we have the Empty House manuscript and all this Doyle stuff. So that's the first. The first key is that book that we choose has to be something in our collection that we want to share with the world. And honestly, for me, the second part is I'm trying to find things that also have a big fan base is the best term for it out there in the world. So it's something that will be of interest to people. I have a lot of recommendations to do. Why don't you do a show on, some, I don't know, other work in our collection? And I think I would love to do that, but I can't afford to have 10 people watching the show now, like it has to be the kind of work that has a wide appeal to it, but also that is an important work. And all the things that we've done, I think, and including the Sherlock Holmes stories, are really important in, the history of literary, in literary history, the history of literary culture.
And you mentioned the importance of communities around this, Ed, and obviously we know there's a huge community for Sherlock Holmes fans. We call ourselves Sherlockians, of course. I'm curious to know, with regard to Pride and Prejudice, of course, you have the Jane Austen Society, another community. Have you seen any differences in the types of communities that gather for this and what they're looking for and how they interact with you?
Sherlockians will be quicker to correct you on on things you might get wrong. I have noticed that, and I expected that, knowing many Sherlockians over my life. They all invest heavily, all these groups. I hadn't really thought about that. It was interesting when the first show we did, the Dracula, became, the community that watched it became very close. But part of that, I think, was the pandemic, and people were, suddenly, isolated and needed to make these connections. And when that show ended, I kid you not, there were tears. There were tears from me, from co-hosts, from the audience. People were really, attached to that show, and so I knew I had to keep it going. And while ending the shows hasn't been as teary, it is still, people are really devoted to these. I don't think any less. I think the Janeite is as devoted to Jane Austen as Sherlockians are to Sherlock Holmes. It's. I mean, in a sense, it's the same. We're all involved in the same thing. It's that diving into a book and wanting to know as much about that world and to kind of live in that world for the time that you're reading it or talking about it or experience it in some other way, like movies or TV, and that devotion is across the board, no matter the kind of book people are interested in.
Let's talk for a minute about more than a minute about Sherlock Mondays. Have you? And you mentioned, and I thought that was great, that Sherlockians are quick to correct you.
They are.
What have you learned anything that you didn't know about Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle as this program has been going? As a result of your guests,
Yeah, I knew a lot going in. I mean, I do it with co-hosts, and it's a group of co-hosts that rotate, and they're all My co-hosts are all invested BSI members. It's Anastasia Klimchinskaya, Monica Schmidt, Mary Alcaro, and Curtis Armstrong. And so one of them will be on with me every week to talk about a story, and they bring all of their Sherlockian knowledge that they've also developed for years to the table to talk about things. I mean, you can't talk with Monica Schmidt, who is, a licensed counselor, and not learn things about the psychology of characters and how they, and how that operates within the stories. I like to ask Curtis Armstrong about performance aspects and character development and things like that. So I can learn things from their specialties. And the audience also does this because there's a live chat audience that goes on with the show. And I learn stuff from them all the time. That's where most of the corrections happen. But sometimes even pronunciation, which is funny. No other fan base corrects me on pronunciation, especially my hard Philly accent. People usually just take that like, okay, that's just the way he pronounces things. But I have to get it right for the Sherlock audience. The thing that I really learn is about perspective, I think. I, of course, have my own perspective growing up, how I grew up and the works that I've studied and the research that I've done. But it's still, all self-perspectives are limited in a sense. And I learn how other people look at stories when I do this, from the audience and from the other people and from my other co-hosts. And that's the most valuable thing for me in doing shows like this is widening my perspective, is learning how to, look at art and then, because of what it is, look at the world in new ways.
Give us an example of something that you've learned from your co-hosts or your commenters on these different perspectives.
I mentioned before about how one of my co-hosts, Monica Schmidt, has these perspectives that help me learn about a character. And honestly, I had never really thought, in reading Sherlock Holmes, I had never really put together the kind of, aspects of his kind of traumatic war experience and how he reacts to Sherlock and reacts to situations, especially early in stories. And the first stories, Study in Scarlet and Sign of Four, Watson keeps mentioning how, he's been wounded and he has to take it easy and he can't be too strenuous. And I just found that so, like he's supposed to be a heroic character, and that's the way he ends up being in all the Sherlock stories. Like he's the one that Sherlock relies on for action sometimes. But he's not like that in the beginning, and I just thought that was an interesting way that Doyle had done it, but something that Monica had brought to the table is to show how no, this is a legitimate reaction for somebody who's seen combat and who is reluctant to jump back into that combat in those kind of dangerous situations. So that was it's maybe conjectural, maybe it's a playing the game bit of an answer, but it's certainly a different perspective that I had on that character.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. It's a good example, too, because it points to the reality of the characters. And that's one of the things that sets apart this kind of a canon that you're collecting here. You've got Dracula and Jane Eyre and Frankenstein and Mary Shelley and Conan Doyle and others. They have big fan bases and they're popular and enduring for a reason. And part of it is because of all of it is because of the craft, the characters, the stories, the time, the place that subsequent generations just keep discovering over and over again. It's interesting. Has there been a program, or is there, I should be asking, is there anything in the collection? What about Dickens? I mean, it just occurred to me that when I'm thinking about, about these names, Dickens has been absent so far.
I didn't mention Dickens, and I should have, because I also do a Dickens show. I do a monthly show on the Pickwick Papers that I started earlier this year in March, and it will run for 20 straight months, and next year in October, in which we talk about one serial part of the Pickwick Papers every month. It's the first, serial book that Dickens had written, and so it's 2-3 chapters a month. Again, it's me and a co-host talking about it, and I'm very invested in Dickens and do a lot. And you can see by all of these authors we mentioned, this is like, Ed, do you live in the 19th century? Well, yeah, I do. I live in the 19th century. These are the works I'm very comfortable with. I really enjoy them. They're my favorites. So Dickens fits in that well. But what's interesting? The kind of way that this is something I have learned in this run so far is that I hadn't realized how grounded Doyle wants to make his stories, how much he wants to put them in a world that his contemporary audience can identify and know, and that London or countryside that they all experience. And I had experienced that same thing with Bram Stoker. And Stoker and Doyle did know each other, and we're kind of friends, or at least thought well of each other as professional colleagues. That Stoker sets Dracula in, for his audience, the very contemporary London and other places that it's set, and he wants the audience to feel as if that threat is in their world. And Doyle does the same thing. He might get some details about London wrong, especially in the first, stories, because he's not that really a Londoner yet. He doesn't know London as well. He's not really lived there. But he wants it to be in a world that his audience recognizes. And that's important for crime stories, mystery detective stories, because there's a threat in those stories that Sherlock has to deal with, Sherlock and Watson have to deal with. And that's all the more real for an audience. And it changes over time, because now when we're back looking at these stories, it seems like a world long. It seems like really another world. That's not the real world for us. So I like to always I always try to remind myself what it would be like to be the first readers of these stories and books, and how would they experience it. And that's a thing that I like, the original reading practices, I think I call it. I don't know if that's a real term. And I like to kind of live in that world myself. Maybe I don't want to be in this world. I don't know. So.
Well, of course, Dickens and Doyle each had what they had in common was the serial nature of their stories, as they were, kind of dripped out over the course of many weeks or many months in various publications. Mm-hmm. And as you're doing your programming, and it strikes me, the Dickens monthly that you do there, is it called What the Dickens?
No, it is just called Pickwick Monthly.
Pickwick Monthly. There you go. But it strikes me that you're doing the same thing. I mean, you're doing weeklies, you're doing monthlies. You're bringing back people time and again, and it's a different story, or it's a continuation of the previous episode. Talk a little bit about engaging people, a similar audience over time, and how that relationship with the readers or with listeners tends to develop.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by serial fiction and how it works and how it changes over time as well. Dickens is working in publishing in a time where it had been going on, but he becomes the master of this, monthly serial where it's an ongoing narrative where he's just going to give you some every month. And then over time he learns how to make it all connect as well. In his first few novels, he's almost read, especially in the Pickwick Papers, he's writing an adventure of the week and then going on. And but then he manages to link it all up and have that. It's not necessarily people constantly talk about when everything's serials, they think, oh, cliffhangers from the early movie serials, but it's not really a cliffhanger that you need in good serial fiction to keep the audience coming back. It's you're keeping them engaged with something interesting has to happen that they want to come back for something else, and you need to see where this story is going or what this character is going to do next. And Dickens masters it early on, but it is an ongoing story. Doyle is at the point at the end of the 19th century where those serial works aren't really being published anymore. People are more interested in just buying the book when it's finished. They want the whole story at once. But not that there aren't some ongoing serials in magazines at the time, but it's not nearly as popular as it had been. And Doyle kind of does something. He's not the first one to do this, but he seems to be the first to really master it, in which the serial is just about these two characters, where Sherlock and Watson every week come on and have an adventure, and you want to come back and see what their next adventure is. And that's less common in serial fiction at the time. And it becomes, as we know, enormously popular. People love these stories. And I think one of the reasons it became so popular is because of that. Is because he created two indelible two characters people wanted to engage with the following. And he also did long serials, too. He also did The Hound of the Baskervilles, ran over several serial issues, but this is a little bit later.
I liken kind of the difference between the short stories and the serialization of the novels. There's a mode of storytelling, and you see it in different television shows as well. It's the difference between a serial and a series, and the series effectively gives you that connection with the characters over and again, and they're self-contained, so you can jump in at any time and feel like you're still part of the environment there, and that you haven't missed anything really impactful. And I think that's wonderful for developing an audience, because you never know where people are going to pick it up. And what you're doing with Sherlock Mondays is very much the same thing. Each one is a self-contained episode, and you have your hosts that people see over and again, and it's a topic that people are hopefully familiar with, but becoming more familiar with over time. So
we do pay attention to the way this is developing as well, the way Doyle is developing his character. Sherlock and Watson have already changed in the first several stories, from that first study in Scarlet and Sign of... They're different in Sign of Four, the next one that he writes a few years later. And then they're changing now again in the stories, and we try to pay attention to that in the show. Now, of course, we're doing publication order. There's no way I'm tackling chronology. There's no way I'm going to say that, well, actually, this story occurred before the other one, so No, I can't do that, because I need to pay attention to how Doyle has developed things, and this is the order that he wrote them in. So this is the way his characters will develop over that order, and we do try to pay attention to that, because I think that's an important element of the stories, is what he wants to do with Sherlock and Watson over time, and how they do develop.
We're going to pause here a moment for a quick word from our sponsor. The holiday season is upon us, and 2024 is almost here, which makes it the perfect time to get over to mxpublishing.com and get yourself, or someone you care about, a 2024 page-a-day Sherlock Holmes calendar. Following the success of the 4 volumes of A Study in Illustrations by Mike Foy, an interesting collaboration surfaced between Mike and the best-selling Sherlock Holmes novelist and editor Richard Ryan. The result? This unique and fascinating page-a-day calendar that is perfect for Sherlockians. Each of the 366 days of 2024, yes, that's right, you get an extra day next year, features a different image and some quote from the canon, and an On This Day event. What a great way to celebrate Sherlock Holmes every day and be reminded of the timeless canonical influence in our lives. Stock is running low, so hurry and grab yours before they are gone. Get over to MX Publishing in the link in the show notes, and if you mention the code IHOSECAL, that's IHOSECAL, IHOSECAL, you'll get $5 off. That's an exclusive for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere listeners. The 2024 Sherlock Holmes Page a Day calendar from MX Publishing. Put it on your shopping list today. So talk with us about your plans for the longevity of this show. Obviously, there are 60 stories in the Sherlock Holmes canon. Are you covering all of them? How long is this extending?
I wish. I just do Sherlock every day. Can I do a Sherlock show like you guys do, like constantly? I would do it live every week for how long has iHost been on the air? How many years now?
We are now concluding our 17th season, gosh. Our companion podcast, Trifles, which is a weekly, we are concluding our 7th season.
I would do that. I wish I could do that, but we have a big collection.
Don't.
We have a big collection. We have lots of other works we need to hit. So, you've got to kind of hit those things. For Sherlock, we're doing the first, we're doing 27 stories in 30 weeks is what we're doing. Okay. And then, because the first couple, the Study on Scarlet and Sign of Four, because they're novellas, we split them into 2 episodes each. And then we're going to we're going to go from the final problem to the empty house. And the empty house is perfect because we have the manuscript for it. So that's a good place for us to stop. But in between those 2 stories, Doyle had published The Hound of the Baskervilles as a serial. And that was the return of Sherlock coming back after being, not written for, was 10 years? Well, I mean, in real life, it was 3 years hiatus, but 10 years in publication. And so what we're doing is after The Empty House, after Sherlock Monday ends, which is free, anybody can watch it, we're going to have a special pay-only show. Same format, same co-host with me, and we're going to do Hound of the Baskervilles in an 8-episode series that will stream on Mondays in May and June. So I think I'll have like a week off, and then I'm right back to it for Hound of the Baskervilles for 2 months. And I'm really looking forward to that because it is a serial. I mean, he wrote it as a serial narrative story. So I'm really interested in seeing how that story works. He did it over, is it 12 parts?
I think it was a full year.
Yeah, and we're gonna do it in 8. So I've got to condense it a little, and weekly. He's doing it in months. But that'll be interesting to see how that develops over time. So people can't register for that yet. I won't post the registration for that until after the new year begins.
Okay, well that's fascinating. And what's required for people who will want to view or listen to the paid version? Is it a Rosenbach Museum and Library membership? Is it a pay-as-you-go?
There'll be a registration fee. You'll have to pay to watch this program, as we do with our courses that we run, where we charge people to participate in the courses. This will be a fee. I don't know what the fee will be yet. We still haven't even figured that out yet, but it'll be a fee. As every show that I've done, because one of the key parts of me doing these shows free online is a way to not only get people to discover the Rosenbach, but to support us as well. And so usually I follow a show with a course in which I have, a professor, like a well-known professor in the field, come in and teach a course on that author. And like we should follow Pride and Prejudice, and this great professor, Juliet Wells from Goucher in Baltimore, came and taught an online course on Emma, on Jane Austen's Emma, after that show ended. But for that, I can only have 25 people sign up for it. So, you're limited into how many people you can reach with that special course. For this limited series, it's unlimited for audience, so as many people can sign up as possible to watch it. And hopefully it will, hopefully the money we raise from that enables us to continue to making these shows, because I have several things in our collection I still want to make shows about.
So, can you give us an example of what other things you'd like to make shows about?
No, because I can't
didn't think so.
Because then people expect it.
We wouldn't tell anybody, Ed.
No, that's the key. I want you to tell everyone about this. At the end of every series we've done, we call them. I don't think I've even said. We call them Biblioventures. That's just the name that I've referred to them as. At the end of every Biblioventure. We people start guessing what's going to be the next one, and there's all kinds of guesses, and then I tease it out, and finally on the last show, the next to the last show, I'll reveal what it is. So the next to the last Sherlock show, I'll reveal what the Biblioventure coming in the fall will be. So
a true cliffhanger. Look at you.
Yeah.
Promoter extraordinaire. Well, let's flip that a little bit. What have people been asking for? What popular elements of the collection there have people pointed out themselves and said, hey, we'd be interested in you doing this kind of thing?
Well, when we started, it was Dracula, of course. So I just thought the natural successor to Dracula was going to be Frankenstein. It was, and people were asking for that, and I of course did it because I'd already planned that's what I was going to do. But then everybody wanted another monster show, and I love monster books. I'll talk about monster books all the time. I used to teach monster courses at college, so I would do monsters all the time. But we're limited to the number of monster stories we have at the Rosenbach. So I wanted to kind of connect it in a way. That's why I did Jane Eyre, because Jane Eyre is still a very gothic novel without, well, unless you call Rochester a monster, which in some ways he is. But so I was able to kind of connect it. And then between Jane Eyre and Jane Austen, I was able to connect it because of the kind of, romantic love story that there's a lot of, crossover in those audiences. And then we finally hit on Sherlock because, I don't know, I've just been talking about Sherlock so much in my whole life. I was like, we need to do Sherlock. And we still collect in these areas, too. We just got a first edition of Hound of the Baskervilles, which we hadn't had in our collection before. So that was nice. So these, shows we collect for. Things people ask for. I give these long-winded answers, and you asked me a specific question, which I didn't answer, which was what have people asked for? The audience just usually asks for their favorite books, and they want. And often my answer is, well, I can't do that. We don't really have that in our collection. They are interested in old books, but of course they're watching these shows. I'm not surprised at that. People tend not to ask for new things, which they could, and we would consider doing, especially if they were related to works that we were doing. But I haven't found people our audience hasn't been that interested in doing, works that are published today. We've had a lot
what's one of the most recent books that is in the Rosenbach Museum and Library's collection?
Maybe Toni Morrison. We have a couple. I mean, she's not living anymore. But she was, publishing, not that long ago. That might be the closest. I don't think we have anybody in our collection that is still. Now, of course, we had one work of hers in our collection when she was still living. But by this point, I'm not sure we have anything in our collection by a living author. I don't think. We'd run courses, though, on living authors sometimes. We just did a Salman Rushdie course on Satanic Verses last year. And so I will have courses occasionally because I think our audience enjoys that stuff. But people don't ask for it. There is the one work that a lot of people have asked for is Moby Dick. And we have one of the great Moby Dick. We have one of the great Melville collections in the world too, with the Rosenbach. And Moby Dick seems like the obvious one for me to go to. This bearded guy who lives in the 19th century, whose favorite novel happens to be Moby Dick. But I love it so much, I won't cram it in. Like, if I did Moby Dick, it would have to be one chapter a week. Like, I'm not going to do any more. And the problem, though, is then that would be a 3-year show. I don't know if I could keep an audience for 3 years talking about Moby Dick. But people have asked for that frequently, and we've done plenty of other Melville programming. We actually did 2 Moby Dick marathon readings that I put together, where we read Moby Dick straight through for it took 25 hours each time. So I love doing that stuff. No. I can't figure out a way to do a Moby Dick show that I would be satisfied with that doesn't require about a 3-year investment.
You want it to be shorter than a whaling voyage.
Yeah. Yes, barely. And it's funny because, that would be a whaling voyage, 3 or 4 years. I would love to finish the Sherlock stories, too, and find some way to do that. I don't think I would bring it back right away next year, because, or at least not in the same way, is that I'm always interested in expanding our audience and growing our audience. And I would figure that if I do Sherlock for 30 weeks, I've done that with the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I'd want to find other audience for something else in our collection to do in the fall. That doesn't mean there couldn't also be another Sherlock show running, maybe not weekly, but so I'm going to see if I can figure out some way to finish the canon, but I don't know how. I don't know. I don't know. I would do 10 shows a week, but obviously I don't have all the time to do that.
Yeah. Well, something to look forward to. Maybe something in your retiring years, like Sherlock did when he headed out to Sussex.
I'm not retiring. I work in a nonprofit arts culture industry, so there's no retirement in the cards.
Well, if anything, Ed, I think you've managed to really nail it with this series, because as a pipe-smoking host, you can let loose at will with this show.
I'm at home, so I can do that. And because the show started in the pandemic, they all started in my own library at home. So for the Sherlock show, I smoked the pipe in all my shows, but this was the one I was like, finally, it fits. It works with the actual text. And so what I do is every show I have a new, not a brand new pipe, but a different pipe at the start of every show I am smoking. So you can tune in and see what pipe Ed is smoking, as long as what cocktail I'm drinking for that episode as well.
Talk a little bit for a minute about the cocktails. How did that get started?
It got started because I wanted to sit at home and drink and smoke and talk about books. And so when I started Dracula, that was something I put in place. I enjoy having cocktails and smoking, and I thought it would be a fun way to do the show. Like, I think I had envisioned Sundays with Dracula, the first Biblioventure that we did, was like a 60s talk show where they're all smoking and drinking as they're talking on the show. Now, it wasn't. It was on Zoom, and I was alone in my study, and other people were Zooming in with me. But I wanted that looser vibe to it. I didn't ever want the shows to turn out to be some, very tedious academic discussions about, why this work is so important in the history of civilization. I didn't want that kind of thing to develop, because it's easy when you're dealing with great books for that to happen. So I wanted to make sure we had fun. So for Dracula, I said, I'll have a cocktail, and I'll invent cocktails every week, and I'll have a new one. And then I realized, oh my God, I have to come up with a new cocktail every week. Now, it wasn't that hard for Dracula, but then when I continued it through Frankenstein, I had a sponsor. I had I called it my liver sponsor. Came in and did and sponsored all the drinks and came up with the recipes. But then I was stuck doing all of them again, And I've done like over 100 drink recipes or something like that for the shows that I've done, and I'm telling you, I'm a little bit out of ideas. So one of my co-hosts, though, Mary Alcaro, is not only a great Sherlockian, she is also an excellent mixologist, and she agreed to develop all the drinks, all the cocktails for the Sherlock show, and they have been outstanding so far. I did have to prod her a little bit because Mary's more of a in the vodka gin camp, and I love gin. Vodka doesn't exist for me, but I'm also a big in the whiskey camp, and she's not as much into that. So I had to kind of suggest that make sure you get enough whiskey drinks in for me. Tonight, on the next show that I'm doing for the Speckled Band, we have it's like a variation on a bourbon milk punch that she has come up with. That's really tasty. So I have someone else designing drinks for me that I can then drink. And this, if this isn't the perfect life, right? So
you really nailed it, Ed. We should have thought of this years ago on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. I guess this is why the show has maintained its longevity.
There you go. You'd both be dead by now if you drank as much in that time frame that I have on my shows.
Well, Ed, anything left that we haven't talked about with regard to Sherlock Mondays that you'd like to ensure our audience is apprised of?
I try to design this show to appeal to both dyed in the wool Sherlockians like you guys are, like kind of I have been in my life, the co-hosts that I have, to have a show that appeals to people that really know Sherlock well, but also people who are coming to Sherlock. This is the first time they've read it. And we have those people, and they've been active in our live chat. And we have a Facebook group page, Sherlock Mondays, that people are active in. And then the people who have never read this, they will get mad if you give a spoiler, and they should. I know it's over 100 years, but still, they don't want spoilers. And so we try very hard not to give any spoilers out if you're reading them for the first time. And that's a balancing act to be entertaining and informative to both the people who know this topic really well and also to people who don't know it at all. And so what I'm trying to do every week is be not just entertaining and fun, but to provide my own take and the take of my co-hosts that people who really know Sherlock will still find interesting, and then new people can learn from it. So we never want to talk over people who don't know, talk over the heads of people who don't know this stuff, and we don't want to talk down to the people who know it really well. And that's a tough balance. And so far it's worked, which is really great. So I think we've managed to hit that balance. So, my message to everyone is even if you think you know these stories well, you can still tune in and learn some things and enjoy the way we're talking about them. It's like having great conversations with other Sherlockians is what it is, and we are careful in our conversations to include those who don't know the stories as well. So we're more Sherlock readers. There are now, as of this show, there are more people reading Sherlock stories than there were before the show started. So there you go. Job done. I win.
That's great. Well, that's all we can ask for. So if folks would like to get more information, you can go to rosenbach.org. Under the events there is Sherlock Mondays listed, hosted by Edward G. Pettit.
And if you register for the show, then I will send you an email every week about what's coming up and links and the cocktail recipes.
That's the important part, yes.
That's the benefit of registering for the show. Otherwise, you could just go to the channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch them there. We do it as an audio podcast as well, so you can find it on whatever podcast platform you use if you just want to listen to it. The only difference in the audio podcast is you don't get to watch me smoke and drink. So...
That's great. Well, we will have links to all of those great places for you to check out Sherlock Mondays. Ed Pettit, thanks so much for being with us on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
What a pleasure, Scott and Bert. Thank you so much for having me on.
What a great example of bringing new people to the world of Sherlock Holmes. I loved how Ed, made that point that he's building more readers for the Sherlock Holmes stories. And he's also learning. He said that he learns how other people look at stories and at art and at the world. And those are just great facets, great dimensions of community. It's very admirable, but it's very innovative and very encouraging, very optimistic, I think.
Yeah, I'm delighted to see this happening, and delighted that we'll be able to join it at some point in the weeks ahead. Folks should stay on the lookout for that. We'll have an announcement for you. But, I think about the course of our own shows here and Trifles, and although we don't generally have guests on Trifles, how just talking week in and week out with you, with our guests, about these various topics, how I certainly am not the same person with the same perspectives as I was when we started these shows those many years ago, and how much I've learned from different perspectives, and how my eyes have been opened. And, I just think it makes for a much more well-rounded experience overall.
The Sherlock Holmes Review is back with articles on Sherlockian film and television, classic canonical scholarship, detective stories, illustrators, collecting, and more. In the latest annual, Curtis Armstrong tells how his love of Sherlock Holmes and acting first came together, how he starred in his first radio series, The Baker Street Theater, while he was still in high school, his encounter with Sherlock Holmes, Hugh Laurie, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he featured in the TV series House, how Sherlock Holmes crossed into his character in the WB series Supernatural, and his role as Inspector Gregson in the audible drama Moriarty, The Devil's Game. The Sherlock Holmes Review is back, combining great design with great writing, welcoming fans of every age and attitude. Get the latest issue, the 2022 annual, at wesexpress.com today.
Everybody knows what that is. That's right. It's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. It's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and we ask you to identify which Sherlock Holmes story we are talking about. Now, if you recall, the last time we were around these parts, we gave you this clue. Those county magnates caused a lot of worry when Holmes went down to a holiday in Surrey. Bert. Bert.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yes.
Which story we're talking about
It's
here?
the one with the fringe on top. You said, sir. Oh, no, it's not that one. That's the story where Mrs. Neville St. Clair complains to Watson's wife that her laundry delivery service keeps sending her ruined undergarments.
Oh, no.
That's the case Watson called the van with the twisted slip.
Boy, oh boy. No, sorry. That was, once again, you've underdone yourself, outdone yourself. It's, well, we're going to turn to our pal, Eric Deckers, who, of course, was our interview subject in the last episode, so it was wonderful to kind of combine these 2 portions of the show. Eric wrote to us and said, "I've got it. It's the story where Sherlock Holmes takes a much-needed vacation with his family after being stressed out from work, only to find that solving crimes is the best medicine. It's National Lampoon's Surrey Vacation, Holidays or Murder." No, wait, that's an Agatha Christie story. It's more likely to be the Reigate Squires. Yes, Eric.
What a guy.
That is, I know, he manages to pull it out every time, pull out that answer just at the last minute. Well, Eric, you are quite correct, and there are a handful of other people who were correct as well, so we're going to do what we always do. We're going to turn around here and give the big prize wheel a spin. Watch it go around, slowing down, keeping us all in anticipation as it lands on number 15, and that looks like it is... Oh, it's our pal Bruce Harris. Hooray! Bruce, congratulations. We do have an item from the I think it was it one of Eric's books? I think we were going to give him Eric's book. If that's an option, or an item from our vaults. So we will make that available to you, Bruce. So thank you for that. Well, this time around, what we will do, here's an interesting offer. You heard Ed talk about the paid version of the Sherlock Mondays that he's going to do with the Hound of the Baskervilles. We will offer one ticket to that program to the winner of this canonical couplet. Here we go. The killer was a big, good-hearted dunce, as beeswing in the bottle showed at once. If you know the answer to the canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you're among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right. I'm glad we have an admission ticket for next year's programming. That's good. It'll keep us from having to get anything out in the mail. And it'll keep Bert muted.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. You know, I make some of my best remarks when I'm muted. At least that's what my wife tells me.
I believe you. I believe you, yeah. Well, before we close out the show, I think it's time to give people some Sherlockian news. It's always nice to hear the news, and there's always news that's fit to share here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Bert, why don't you lead us off with a news story?
Oh, there's so much going on. You know, there are a couple of things happening. First of all, it is the end of November, obviously. And so we're looking forward to the birthday festivities. Sherlock Holmes's birthday of January 6th will be celebrated all over the world, but particularly in New York City. And there will be the return of the Gaslight Gala on Friday, January 12th from 6 to 10 p.m. And you can find out all the details. We will put the link in the show notes. And it's nice that that's returning.
It is. It's been a long time since that was available. And for folks who may not be familiar, that is a dinner on Friday evening of the BSI weekend. It's open to everyone. And it's a raucous good time, typically. So check that out as time narrows to when we see everyone in New York for the BSI weekend. Well, if you are out and about in the city of London, the good news is there are geese about. And they're not around on the pavement, however. They are up on the lamp poles, particularly on Baker Street. These are illuminated geese. They first appeared about 4 years ago. And in celebration of Christmas, you can see a little blue carbuncle buried down in the gullet of each one of the geese there on the lamp poles. So you can check that out. We'll have a link to that and those images in the show notes.
And there are plenty of books on the horizon. In fact, there's a recent one, Nancy Springer's Enola Holmes. Nancy Springer has written the 9th in her series about Holmes's sister Enola. And this is Enola Holmes. You say you're not satisfied with geese. You say you want more. Enola Holmes and the Mark of the Mongoose. And the interesting thing about this is there's a connection with Rudyard Kipling in that particular story. And so that's bound to be very clever.
Yeah, it is. She's really been on a tear in recent years, so it's great to hear that. We should note that actor Joss Ackland has passed away. Joss Ackland, of course, played Jeffro Rucastle in the Granada television version of The Copper Beeches. We wrote this up on the website. You can check that out in the link there. But he was just a perfect casting for Jeffro Rucastle. Everything from the crazy comical stories that he told Violet Hunter to the menacing aspect out in the hallway. Just a wonderful way to bring that character to life. And we're sorry to see that Joss Ackland has passed away.
Yeah, fabulous actor. And there are people planning interesting Sherlockian events for 2024. The Agra Treasurers will be holding their 9th Holmes, Doyle, and Friends Conference in Dayton, Ohio on March 22nd to 23rd. And I've already told Dan Andriaco that I am looking forward to attending that.
No, will this be your first time?
Yes. I was supposed to go to the one that was happening right around COVID, and when that was, so I did not go. When it was canceled, I didn't go.
You would have been pretty lonely.
I thought that was a wise thing to do, but there you are. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, that should be really something.
Are you going to come to that?
I don't know if I will or not. I've gone a couple of times before, and I've really enjoyed myself. So it depends on the scheduling. We'll see how things play out. And for those of you interested in international publications, we have some news from Japan. Masamichi Migurashi, and that is a Baker Street irregular. He is affectionately known to us as Mitch Migurashi. He has a new book called Sherlock Holmes' Bible, a 170-year story of the eternal detective. It's been published by Hayakawa Shobo in Japanese. That was in 2022. It has won the Mystery Writers of Japan Award for the best critical and research work. And this is the first time that a Sherlockian work has won the award since the Mystery Writers of Japan was founded over 75 years ago. So congratulations to Mitch, and we will look forward to seeing if we can get an English translation of that book at some point in the future.
And our friend Laurie King will be publishing a new book in 2024. Bantam will be bringing out Laurie King's The Lantern's Dance, a novel of suspense featuring Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes. But there's a lot more going on there than that. Holmes and Mary Russell are in France. They're dealing with a threat against Holmes's son. And in the course of the story, we'll learn a lot about Holmes's family history. And Laurie is blogging about that book on her website, which is not unusually laurierking.com, laurierking.com.
And we will look forward to chatting with Laurie about that book and the series and other works of hers in 2024. So stay tuned for that. You can find a link to all of these news sites on the show notes, which are available right there wherever you happen to be listening to us, or, of course, on ihearofsherlock.com. Make sure you stop over there and give it a look. Well, Bert, I can't believe it. We've done it again.
Hooray!
Crazy, isn't it? Well, next up, we have, 2 more shows before the end of the year. Who will join us? What will we talk about? These are the questions we ask ourselves. So stay tuned to see if we can actually answer them.
I can't wait to find out. Sometimes I ask myself those questions after the show is over, which I expect, says something about my ability to retain information.
That's something. Well, that's often the way I respond to people who greet me before I'm giving a speech. They say, I can't wait to hear what you're talking about. And I said, neither can I.
Me too.
Yeah, well, until we are back here with you next time, we can always recommend our other show, Trifles, where we're there every single week. If you can't get your fill of us twice a month here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, you can get an overabundance of us on Trifles. We'd welcome you over there. And, of course, on all of the socials, don't forget to leave a rating, review, feedback for the show. We welcome all of it, and we do appreciate your support throughout the year. Until the next time we are around here, it's time for us to say, the game's afoot.
Afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.